BioCentury This Week is brought to you by IQVIA Biotech. For biotech companies striving to bring innovative therapies to market and maximize patient impact, IQVIA Biotech is the trusted CRO of choice. Backed by 25 years of unparalleled experience and deep therapeutic expertise, our full-service clinical development solutions are purpose-built to accelerate success. IQVIA Biotech helps early-stage biotechs de-risk by developing strategic clinical development plans, guiding drug candidates along the most promising pathways. Leverage data-driven models and dynamic tools to craft a compelling value story and maintain momentum through every phase of drug development.
David Baltimore, the Nobel-winning molecular biologist, has passed away at age 87. We'll take a look at his legacy on the latest BioCentury This Week podcast. We'll also discuss prominent Boston biotech VC Atlas and its newest later stage fund, which closed at $400 million. GLP-1 assets, they're not just for obesity. They are adding to the growing late-stage MASH pipeline. Plus, we'll also discuss the latest data out of Sanofi for its phase 3 dermatitis candidate. And we'll also discuss target diversity in chronic urticaria, now that blockbuster Dupixent is approved for the indication commonly known as hives. Joining me on today's podcast are my colleagues
Simone Fishburne, Editor-in-Chief.
Selena Koch, Executive Editor.
Lauren Martz, Executive Director of Biopharma Intelligence.
Stephen Hansen, Director of Biopharma Intelligence.
And I'm Jeff Cranmer, Executive Editor here at BioCentury and host of the BioCentury This Week podcast. Hey, a quick heads up, out now, BioCentury's Back to School package this year written by Steve Usden, our Washington editor and a frequent contributor to our podcast. He takes a look at how FDA and the broader regulatory system must be reimagined to set the pace and scope of innovation for decades to come. Subscribers to BioCentury can go to biocenturybacktoschool.com for immediate access. If you're not yet a subscriber, a complimentary trial awaits you. Go to the same link and it will grant you access to all the in-depth data and analysis that we are known for at BioCentury. Again, that's biocenturybacktoschool.com. You can also check out our sister podcast, The BioCentury Show. Simone grilled Mr. Usden last week on his thoughts on how to reimagine FDA. So that's available at our YouTube channel, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and a few other places. Check it out. It's a great discussion. And I can promise you that Steve does not discuss mullets at all. Okay, David Baltimore passed away, Simone. Tell us a little bit about what he meant to the world of science. I know that's a crazy word these days. And what did it take to win a Nobel Prize at age 37?
Thanks, Jeff. A pleasure to be here. I just want to make the point, I did not grill Steve Usden. I thought I gave him a lot of layups, like really easy ones. But anyway, so David Baltimore was a giant in our industry even before it was an industry. So his seminal discovery of reverse transcriptase sort of overturned the dogma, right, that you only go from DNA to RNA to protein, showing that the reverse could happen. It obviously later turned out to be central for HIV and AIDS, as well as many other things, but that was a very big one. And I think throughout his life, he was a strong advocate for research into that. And I think I've heard and read that he found it tough going to get people actually to research in that area. But I sort of wanted to make the point that this discovery that he made, the scientific discovery, I think was immediately understood for its huge impact. And I think that that is rarely the case even now. Quite often it takes a little while before the impact of some scientific advance is really understood and is tested and so on. Probably the one in recent years that is most similar is maybe the discovery of CRISPR, where I think around the world people kind of immediately knew that that was so important. But CRISPR was discovered when the biotech industry was actually, quite mature. If Baltimore got the Nobel in 1976, right? I mean, when was Genentech formed? Around that time, a couple of years later. So this was sort of predates our industry, even though it's been a fundamental building block of the science that sort of went into it. And obviously, in his lifetime, Baltimore went on to be a very important person in the industry, as well as a big academic figure. I know you're going to write, Jeff, a longer obituary, but I think he was the head of Rockefeller at one point and Caltech, and he came from, I think he started the Whitehead, did he? And he came from MIT. So I heard him speak at the Weizmann Institute when I did my PhD there. Certainly was this huge international figure for some very incredible work that he did very early on in his career.
Thanks for that, Simone. Genentech actually 1976 as well. That's when Robert Swanson and Herbert Boyer.
Right, but he got the Nobel then, so he made the discovery long before then. You know.
Yeah, for sure.
Actually, not long before then, but before then.
Yeah, I look forward to...
We just don't have that many scientific discoveries that moment people know, oh my God, this could change the course of things. That's my take anyway.
Yeah, I look forward to speaking with people to learn about his legacy. So I will be doing that this week. All right. Heading over to the UK to Stephen Hansen. Stephen, Atlas closed its third opportunity fund, announced it last week at $400 million. The fund is designed to give additional capital to startups already backed by the firm's core funds. You took a look at this. What does it say about the markets in general and opportunity funds in particular?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. I think it is sort of a reflection of kind of the reality that our sector is kind of living in right now, right? I mean, IPOs are scarce. There's no clear picture as to when, they will be coming back in a meaningful way or sustainably. And so the follow through on that is that private companies are having to stay private for longer. And so, obviously VC funds can, in some ways, adjust sort of mid-fund if they want to try and, maybe have a few smaller number of investments and be able to take some of those companies longer. But eventually, if this period goes on long enough, at some point you have to make a decision as to whether you're going to continue to back these companies or, from a new fund, or if you're going to, just move on and do some new investments. And so that's where these, opportunity funds come in is, I think we're at that point to where they had to make that decision. And so this allows Atlas's companies to kind of re-up and push forward.
Sounds good. Well, thanks for that, Stephen. We're going to take a quick break and then we'll dive into the clinic. We'll talk MASH, dermatitis, and hives. What's happening in the pipeline there?
BioCentury This Week is brought to you by the 12th China Healthcare Summit in Shanghai. From in-licensing to new co's, cross-border deals from Asia are transforming global biopharma. Meet top decision makers and investors at the 12th China Healthcare Summit to explore emerging opportunities and tackle key challenges in this rapidly evolving landscape. Join us in Shanghai October 22nd to 24th to get a first-hand look at China's dynamic life sciences ecosystem. Register and learn more at biocenturychinasummit.com.
Okay, we are back. Advanced rates end September 19th for the China Healthcare Summit. We have a packed set of panels, a very cool pre-event networking session. We almost have a full roster of presenting companies. We would love to have a few more join us. We have even some European companies coming over to join us. Sobi will be there. And we have a great lineup of innovative Chinese biotechs, including AlphaMab, Hua Medicine, and many more. Okay, more than 13 years after metabolic-associated steatohepatitis, or MASH, the artist formerly known as NASH, burst onto the scene following positive phase 2 data from Intercept, the field has grown to more than 30 assets in late-stage development. Stephen, you had a look at the pipeline?
Yeah, no, thanks, Jeff. I think that, what kind of triggered this was last year we had the first approval in MASH, which was Madrigal's Rezdiffra, which is a THRB agonist. So that was approved last year. And then just last month, we had the second approval in this indication, which was Novo's Wegovy semaglutide, the GLP-1. So just wanted to, I guess, have a look and see where the late stage pipeline had gone. And as you mentioned, it's grown considerably. I mean, having more than 30 programs in phase 2 or later. And, all of this is still kind of coming on what I think there were kind of two major concerns that had cropped up. You'd already mentioned how much interest there was in MASH following that Intercept data 12 years ago. That first concern was whether or not the size of the market was as big as people had originally thought it to be. So originally there was so much excitement that this was going to be a massive new opportunity. And then there were some concerns that maybe those perceptions were overblown and that launches in MASH were actually going to be really tough. It's going to be hard to find patients because, if you have to do a biopsy every time, these sorts of things. But I think the Madrigal's launch, and I know we're still early, but, we're a little over a year, about 18 months into that launch. I think that's, answered some of those questions. They've actually done pretty well. They reported $212 million in second quarter sales, which in and of itself was a 55% jump over what they reported in the first quarter. And so it's really exceeded expectations. So at least in my mind, I think that's to some degree answered that first question, that there is demand there. There is an ability to find patients without having to chase, these biopsy confirmed diagnoses. So I think that's been answered. The big question that's still hanging out there now, though, is sort of the big cloud, is what impact the GLP-1s are going to have on this. And I think that's where we're going to start to get into finding that out in the near term.
Yeah, I remember, Stephen, when we first started writing around all this excitement around NASH, it was then called now MASH. I think a lot of the conversations I remember having around the multifactorial nature of the disease and the underlying pathology, and with the question being like, are you going to need combinations? Are we going to need an anti-inflammatory and a metabolic, or something more directly anti-fibrotic, and put them together, and what's going to be effective? And I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, the conversation is more now around, well, actually, do we just need GLP-1s? That's it.
No, I think that's right. I mean, I think that's so it's partly around will GLP-1s either just eat up the market in terms of everyone will just be put on a GLP-1 that has MASH and you won't really have an opportunity for another mechanism. Or on the flip side is, since having MASH and having obesity are oftentimes comorbidities that come together, if patients start getting treated with a GLP-1 for the obesity, are you going to see a shrinking prevalence or incidence of MASH, and that opportunity that was there is going to be shrinking because these patients are being treated and then they're actually no longer having fatty liver disease. But I think you're right in the sense that I think this is very much going to be a combination play. And, given the tolerability that we know, exists for the GLP-1 class, I think there's still going to be plenty of opportunity for other mechanisms there. So even if it might be in a second line setting, I think that's where we still have to, especially now with GLP-1s, should you have patients that are on GLP-1 background therapy? Should you be excluding patients that are receiving GLP-1s for obesity, that sort of thing? So I think there are some design issues, I think, going into it that some companies are maybe still trying to figure out before they launch into a phase 3.
Stephen, or maybe Selena, we know that there are at least reports of GLP-1s being involved in multiple different pathologies, or at least having apparently therapeutic effects. So outside of diabetes and obesity, we're now talking about MASH. We've talked about Alzheimer's. There are reports on addiction, which is sort of reward circuitry. To what degree is it known whether these reduce to similar pathways versus are they just very different systems that they're interacting with in these different pathologies?
Right. So the biology of GLP-1s is complex. There's no one pathway that they hack through. There's quite a lot of work that's been done on the mechanism in various contexts. And the reality is it's doing all of those things whenever somebody takes it, right? And so we started off by saying, like, the importance of combinations in MASH is probably going to be big. Well, GLP-1s kind of offer a combination in a single mechanism. So for Alzheimer's, the thought is that the inflammation, that's kind of neuroinflammation driving that disease, might be addressable with the kind of anti-inflammatory aspect of GLP-1s. Like you're saying, in addiction, there's reward circuitry. The GLP-1s affect reward circuitry. And there's its metabolic effects as well, and gut motility and other things that it does. And so several of those things could be important and efficacious in the context of MASH.
So I think it's going to be really interesting just to see how this field unfolds at a sort of at the level of the scientific underpinnings.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Stephen, any final thoughts there?
Oh, I was just going to say, I'm just looking forward to seeing how the trajectory of sales overall, maybe for Wegovy, sort of goes over the next 6 to 9 months, and then seeing if that has an impact on Madrigal, because there was some worry that you could be stealing things here, but I think this is a big enough space to occupy multiple mechanisms. So, but it'll just be curious to see what happens here.
Yeah, and if you want to look closer into this, Stephen put together a very nice pipeline with all these programs that are late stage, divvied up by target. And if you do go to BioCenturyBackToSchool.com to get that free trial, you'll be able to access Stephen's story on MASH as well. Let's head over to Sanofi. Last week, the pharma released data on its amlitelimab. Hope I'm saying that correctly. The therapy met the primary endpoint in a phase 3 trial to treat atopic dermatitis. Investors not so excited. I believe stock went down around 9%, shaving off billions in market cap. Lauren, you had a look. What's going on here?
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, so this is a program that I think Sanofi was expecting to follow on to Dupixent. We had last seen phase 2 results from this program that looked pretty promising. And I think part of the market reaction was the fact that the response rates, the proportion of patients who achieved 75% skin clearance, as one example, wasn't as high as what was seen in phase 2. So this is an OX40 ligand targeted mAb. We had also seen data from a program from Amgen targeting the OX40 receptor that was a little disappointing in its initial phase 3 readouts last year. And there was a lot of optimism that targeting the ligand might be a more effective way to treat atopic dermatitis than targeting the receptor. So I think it was just expectations were very high for this. And there's also just so much attention to finding the next Dupixent for atopic dermatitis because that's been such a successful program. And because there's still room to improve on the response rates that we're seeing with Dupixent. Maybe about a third of patients are getting a really high positive response in their skin clearance. So I think it was just a case of high expectations. And I think there also may still be an opportunity for a program like this that meets the primary endpoints in a phase 3 trial, even if it doesn't perform quite as well as the therapy on the market, as maybe some others in clinical development, because of the fact that there are a lot of patients who don't respond to available therapies. This is a different mechanism. This is a different target. In some ways, it's upstream of the cytokines that Dupixent targets. So it's possible that you'll have a different set of responders. This is also a therapy that seems to have a relatively clean safety profile, which is, a benefit in an indication like this.
And does it have a convenience advantage?
Yes, that was the other positive that came out of this trial. They tested subcutaneous dosing at 4-week and 12-week intervals, and they actually saw very similar responses when it was delivered at those intervals. So Dupixent's dosed every 2 weeks. This may be a big advantage for patients if they can go 3 months between dosing.
All right. Well, speaking of Dupixent, that blockbuster in April became the first new targeted therapy for chronic urticaria in more than a decade. And our colleague Tierney Baum took a look at the pipeline for this indication. Lauren, Selena, you both edited this piece. What did Tierney find?
Well, maybe we can start with why this has become such a popular indication all of a sudden. I feel like a couple of years ago, we started seeing it more often, and before that, I hadn't really even heard of it. So before Dupixent was approved, back in 2014, Xolair was approved. And so it kind of carved a regulatory and reimbursement path. There's this well-defined approvable endpoint, the UAS7. It's Urticaria Activity Score at 7 days. That's, approvable. There is a path to reimbursement, and I didn't realize how large it was. It's like up to 1% of the population experiences it. So it's this large chronic market where there's still a lot of unmet need because there's a lot of people who kind of don't respond or partially respond, inadequately respond to either Xolair or Dupixent. Lauren, do you want to pick up like some of the newer mechanisms coming?
Yeah, well, I think another contributing factor is that a lot of the mechanisms that work in some other inflammatory allergic type diseases may have a potential role here. So Tierney has looked through the pipeline and found that we have the IgE targeted therapies like Xolair, the IL-4, Dupixent. So some of the most recent data has come from BTK inhibitors from both Novartis and Sanofi. And then I think the mechanism that so far is showing potential best-in-class profile would be the c-KIT inhibitors, which do come with some tolerability issues that I think we're starting to understand more as they move past or move through phase 2 testing.
So let's talk about BTK a little bit. You said Sanofi was one. So this reminds me a lot of the discussion we just had. So Sanofi brings another molecule along, hopes it's at least as good as Dupixent. But right now, between the Novartis BTK and the Sanofi BTK, it kind of looks like the Novartis one might be performing a bit better. Is that right?
Yeah. So far within this class, I think Novartis's remibrutinib has shown higher efficacy on this UAS7 scale. Sanofi's rilzabrutinib hasn't performed as well. And this is a program where Sanofi had previously said it planned to bring this into a phase 3 trial last year in CSU. We haven't seen any indication that that's happened yet. There have been some other failures for this therapy in phase 3 trials for other indications. So I think it's unclear if this is something that will continue to advance.
Yeah, okay. When you think about the pipeline, I think there's something like 7 different mechanisms that Tierney found. What are the primary goals for differentiating from Dupixent or Xolair? Like what do companies need to do now?
Sure. So if you think about the disease mechanism behind urticaria, an activation of a certain type of T cells leads to this IgE response, which acts on the mast cells and triggers them to sort of release these granules that can eventually lead to hives. So the initial therapies are working at the T cell or at the IgE antibodies that are immediately downstream from that. I think some of the newer mechanisms are trying to act on the mast cells themselves, which seem to be like a really key player in this indication. So different ways to prevent the mast cells from, releasing the granules and eventually causing these hives. It's sort of getting, we've seen these broader T cell IgE-based mechanisms do well in this indication. And they have broad efficacy. We're talking about Dupixent for the second time today because this works in multiple diseases. T cells are involved in a lot of different inflammatory diseases. The trend and it seems as though the early stage programs in this indication are trying to get a little more specific to the mast cell pathology. And this is a great indication for therapies that address mast cell dysfunction.
Yeah, it seems like complete responses right now for Xolair or Dupixent are still a minority of patients, right? Around 30% for Xolair and around 15% for Dupixent. So there's room for improvement just on efficacy. There's room for improvement on speed of efficacy. I think Dupixent in particular takes kind of a long time for that benefit to show up. And then Urticaria is a kind of an umbrella for there's several types of it. There's, chronic spontaneous where you don't know the trigger. There's chronic inducible where it can be induced by a variety of different triggers. And there might be, certain mechanisms that work better in certain types of the disease. I don't think we know that yet, but I think those are all avenues for exploration for better serving and differentiating.
Hey, Lauren, are these then therapies that people need to be on chronically? They take them for life?
So these are designed as chronic therapies. This isn't something that you take when an attack comes on for immediate relief, as you would maybe some kind of antihistamine. So that's the idea. I think we don't know at this point whether or not patients have to be on it for life, or, how long the efficacy may last, and if you may need to cycle through different therapies that are, chronic in nature.
That's what I was going to ask, because that's one of the visions that Paul Hudson has talked about for Dupixent and atopic dermatitis, is that not only is it a huge market, which is, in his mind, very underpenetrated, but also that patients will, have these very high expectations. It's sort of a victim of its own success, because it's been so good that people have very high expectations. And so when they get a flare-up, even if they're on one medication, they might be more likely then to cycle, like you just talked about, through other medications, and they might even come back to Dupixent. But sort of, I guess that this existence of multiple different mechanisms, as well as multiple therapies within these mechanisms, sort of raises the question as to whether this disease might also be treated in that way. Like you could.
Well, I think it raises a need for precision medicine, right? If you didn't have to cycle because you didn't know which one was the best one, like if you could just pick the best one for you out of the gate, that would be very helpful. Now, you might still end up getting resistant and needing something else later, but.
Yeah, that's interesting, because my understanding is that they're all taken when antihistamines don't work. So I'm assuming that antihistamines is the first port of call.
It is.
Right.
Yeah.
But then if that doesn't work, maybe you go get profiled in your scenario, Selena. Like what's the mechanisms in your pathology? That's definitely an interesting area to watch. Anyway, it's some very cool pictures in Tierney's article.
Oh yeah, those are always sweet. I love when we start hitting up the bio render to make those cool images of what's going on. All right, well, thank you all. It's good to do a very clinical development-esque show today. And Simone, I know you had a busy weekend watching tennis, so you probably are all tennised out, but I do need to give you props for picking the winner of the men's in the U.S. Open. And we will catch you all next week. Links to everything we discussed will be in the show notes. You can go to BioCenturyPodcast.com as well. And a special thanks to Kendall Square Orchestra, which provides the music for our podcasts. They are gearing up for their new season. If you're in the Boston area, it sounds like a lovely night out. We'll catch you next week.
BioCentury would like to thank IQVIA Biotech for supporting the BioCentury This Week podcast. Learn why IQVIA Biotech is proud to be the go-to CRO supporting biotechs from innovation to patient impact. Visit IQVIABiotech.com.